Here with Engadget, and this here is the Evo 3D for Sprint. It's a phone from HTC, and the claim to fame here is the 3D camera. It can take 3D stills and 3D video. So other than that, it is essentially the same innards as the Sensation in Europe and the Sensation 4G in the US for T-Mobile, but of course adapted to run on Sprint's network. There is a CDMA radio as well as a WiMAX radio on board. As far as the specs, they're very similar. You'll see the same QHD display with a 960 by 540 pixel resolution, and of course a dual-core Snapdragon processor at 1.2 gigahertz inside. Now they've bumped the RAM to 1 gig up from 768 megabytes on the Sensation. So that's basically the rundown of the specs. And of course, you know, you have this crazy 3D camera. Now, those two sensors are 5 megapixel autofocus. There's a dual LED flash, so it's not the same level of quality camera as the Sensation, which has an 8 megapixel camera. So keep that in mind, because I'll talk about this a little bit later. But first, let me just give you a quick tour of this phone. So starting at the bottom here, you have the usual 4 capacitive buttons: the home, menu, back, and search keys. And at the top here, you have the HTC logo and the Sprint logo, but on top of that, you have an earpiece with some sensors and an embedded LED right roughly where my finger is, right there, my thumb. And then, of course, a front-facing camera as well. Now, if you turn it over, basically the back is dominated by this camera pod. You can see it's rimmed in red aluminum, but if you look really close, there are actually some dots here, a little pattern of dots, and that's where the speaker is hiding. Other than that, there's a little HTC logo here, and where it gets really interesting is if I walk you around the edges. So starting with the top, you have the standard 3.5mm headphone jack, a secondary microphone for stereo video recording, and probably noise cancellation. Of course, the power lock key, which unfortunately is really easy to trigger and feels kind of mushy. So one of the drawbacks is a lot of new HTC devices actually have, there's now a delay when you hit this power button before the phone turns on. Somehow they turn that feature off, and so the Evo 3D will turn on as soon as you hit this very easy to trigger power button. So that's a bit of a drawback. On the left side, you have a micro USB charge and data port, and really nothing else. On the bottom, you have the primary microphone and a little indent here to put your finger to pry off the cover. Now, just like the Sensation, the entire back is the battery cover, including these edges. So that's a commonality in design. Now, on the right-hand side here, this is really exciting. You have a gigantic aluminum double detent dedicated camera key. It feels really wonderful. Let me show you. So I'm here in the camera, and I'm actually in 3D mode right now. As you can see from the switch on top here, there's a 3D, 2D slider. And so I'm in 3D mode, and then I can switch it back to 2D here, which will look a lot less fuzzy. And then if I press the camera key, it doesn't actually move the phone too much, so you won't screw up your shots. Now, continuing along the edge here, you'll find a volume rocker. Again, feels really, really mushy. And I think part of the reason behind the mushiness is that this little pod is attached to the main body of the phone, but all of the other buttons are part of the back cover. So they detach as you detach the back cover. And I think it's not a direct kind of mechanical connection. And that's probably why it feels mushy. So here you see the HTC Sense lock screen. Of course, this is Sense 3.0, just like on the Sensation, and you have some shortcuts. For example, if you pull this camera into this ring, you get to the camera. That's very cleverly done. That's one of the few things that we really liked on Sense 3.0, so I just wanted to show it to you. I'm going to pop the battery cover off and show you the innards of this phone. So popping the battery cover literally means removing the entire cover, including the edges, as you can see. And so under here you see the pod with the speaker right there. And of course there's a micro SD card slot with an 8 gigabyte micro SD card supplied right there. And this is the battery. And that's pretty much all you have under here. Notice the translucent black finish here. Very similar to the Incredible 2 and some of the newer HTC phones. In fact, the Sensation again. So let me pull this off, cover the serial numbers, and let's have a look at the battery capacity. I believe it's up here somewhere. So it's 1730 milliamp hour. It's a pretty hefty battery here. Unfortunately, it doesn't translate in really very good battery life. So that's something I'm going to get into in a minute. But let me put this back together and turn it back on. You can see the startup process here. So from a physical point of view, this is very similar to the old Evo, as well as maybe the Incredible 2, and in some ways similar to the Sensation. Of course, software-wise, it's extremely similar to the Sensation. And here we are, booting. So, give you a bit more of a close-up while we're booting here. There's a nice little silver HTC logo. This is a nice little pattern. This is a soft touch finish. You can see that it stops at the edge here. This is actually well done, but it feels a little cheap. And unfortunately, compared to, say, the Incredible 2 or the Sensation, this phone just doesn't feel as well put together, and the materials that just don't have the same sense of quality to them as some of the other HTC phones we've played with recently. So here you go. The boot process is pretty quick, as you can see. And this is how you unlock. It's still booting, as you can tell. Notice that you still have the silver rim around the capacitive keys, just like the Evo 4G had. And speaking of the Evo 4G, I actually have one here, so just give you a side-by-side quickly here. So as you can see here very well, the 3D is a little narrower, maybe a little taller than the 4G. And thickness-wise, well, they're pretty similar. The Evo 4G is maybe a little thicker overall, but not by much. So wider, the Evo 3D is narrower and the Evo 4G is wider, and the little taller here on the 3D, and weight-wise they're about the same. So that's one of the other things that I wanted to point out. And of course, there's no kickstand. So you have the kickstand on the Evo 4G, and that's gone from the 3D. That's a feature probably a lot of people will miss. And speaking of this pod, there's another issue with it, is that we're not sure if this is glass or plastic, but it does cause a bunch of optical issues with the camera, halos in bright light, and it's very flush, as you can see. What I mean, you're going to end up scratching quite easily. Unfortunately, not much you can do about that, but something that I think HTC and Sprint could have designed better by maybe raising the cameras a little bit. So, now of course, software is very much the same as Sense. On the Sensation, as you can see, there's the same really cool carousel. This is smooth as butter. Performance here is top-notch, obviously, since we're dealing with the dual-core 1.2 gigahertz processor. To give you a feel for things, let me just go into the app tray, and you can see that everything is just smooth as butter. Unfortunately, this carousel thing is cool, but if you're just trying to go one notch at a time, it actually ends up being a little difficult, because if the faster you go, you know, the smaller it gets, and you get this endless carousel kind of design, which is, you know, a neat feature, but it's mostly just, you know, 3D effects at this point, as you can see here. So now let's browse the web. That's always a good test for things. There's a web browser in here somewhere. Here we go. And of course, QHD means you can get really, really, really high resolution here on the fonts, which is really, really lovely, easy to read. So I'm going to type Engadget. In fact, I think I've got some autocomplete options here, if I do it right. So here we go. This is directly to the desktop site. So this is over 4G. As you can see, we're on WiMAX right now, up there. This gives you a feel for the performance. What we found is that actually WiMAX performance, at least here in San Francisco, is about the same as HSPA Plus on T-Mobile and AT&T. It's not staggeringly great. I mean, LTE really is noticeably faster. So here's the web browser. As you can see, this loaded really quickly. Scrolling is smooth as silk. Absolutely buttery smooth. You'd expect that, obviously. This is nothing new. Look at that. And maybe some pinch to zoom here to give you a feel for how smooth and quick this actually works. So there you go, the web browser. Of course, there's flash support, etc. Quadrant scores on this very much the same as the Sensation. You're looking at pretty much a doubling in performance from the original Evo 4G. Now, there's some pre-installed software. I'm just going to quickly go through this. There's really not much here. So let's get started here. There's a bunch of Sprint apps. I should probably go to the very top. So as you can see, there's a few things I installed. A Online Radio is mine. Adobe Reader comes pre-installed. Amazon MP3 comes pre-installed. So there's Blockbuster. Let's see. I installed Dropbox. Of course, I installed Engadget. Facebook, I remember one of these two, either Facebook or Twitter, came pre-installed. I think it was Twitter.